Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. In this training session, we're going to be talking about violence in the workplace. I've partnered with BLR to put this together. And so while fortunately workplace violence is a relatively rare occurrence, we must always be fully prepared to deal with it in a way that protects us all from harm. And you play an important role in preventing violence. You help recognize potential threats, you diffuse violent situations, and more importantly, you train your employees on how to follow those proper security procedures. AlphaStaff is a certified provider through the Society of Human Resource Management and with HR Certification Institute. And so this webinar today will be approved for 1 credit by each organization. So if you are interested, need those credits, please reach out. There'll be an email at the end, or you can reach out to your HRIM and we'll give you that certification number and we'll make sure to provide that information to you to get the credit. The presenter today, that's me, Amy Brown. I am an HR account manager. I've been with AlphaStaff since 2015, and I am in San Diego, California, so my history is mainly with California employment law, but I have led multi-state employees and managers. I do have a lot of emphasis and practice with day-to-day operations, employee relations. So I think I'm a really good presenter and a best practice person to talk you through how to go to your C-level, right, or your owner and say, we need to get an emergency evacuation plan, or here are some things that we need to think about when we're terminating someone, right? I've been in your shoes, and I know a lot of you wear an HR hat, even though you may not be in HR. So hopefully today you'll walk away with some really good tips and techniques, and then understanding what's important, what's not, and then how to go back to your supervisor, managers, and roll that type of procedure out in your environment. Our objective today is to help you deal effectively with workplace violence. At the end of the training session, you will be able to identify the causes of workplace violence, spot the signs of potential violence, follow required security procedures, respond effectively to violent acts, and recognize and respond to terrorist threats. Let's start with the background on violence. So in addition to giving you tools, I want to make sure you understand the possible sources of violence and heighten your awareness, right? So those sources come from a lot of different avenues. They come from employees, they come from former employees, customers, and then some things people don't think about is outsiders, such as vendors, delivery people, friends and partners of employees, ex-spouses, criminals, right? So you could have employees working in a high-risk area, or maybe they're working a graveyard shift, they're working with money, and so they're going to be exposed to different things, such as, or people, such as muggers, any kind of violent acts that could be around them that you want to educate and train them on what to look for and how to respond. And then finally, terrorists. So although for most companies like ours, like yours, right, hopefully the risk is very low. But if you are working in one of those high profile government agencies, or maybe a building that's really tall, or a building with other companies that are high risk, you know, it could happen, the day and age we live in, right? We definitely need to be aware. So we'll talk a little bit about that and just remind you that that is a source that we need to be aware of and try to plan for. Everyone is affected by workplace violence, not just the victims. That's why it's important for employees to talk about a violent incident, and if necessary, recommend professional assistance for people who have trouble coping. So let's follow these guidelines, right? So let's be patient and understanding with victims of violence. You know, victims may not bounce back right away, right? They may be agitated, they may be numb, they may be introverted. And so their normal working routine may be affected. So we want to make sure that we're aware of that. We are trying to accommodate that and being sensitive and empathetic, and then working towards the tools and resources they may need to get better. Realize that witnesses to crimes can also have emotionally stressful reactions. Let's be sensitive to witnesses who may be a little bit more on edge or distracted. Coworkers who weren't even involved and maybe didn't even witness, but they're seeing their friends go through it, or their loved ones, you know, I guess if work together, right? But basically, coworkers are also affected, even if they had no role in it or weren't even around. Just by being around in the situation and having to interact with people that were affected by it, it impacts them as well. And then finally, remembering that customers and others, such as vendors or delivery people, could be affected. So if you have a delivery person that came to your facility and there was a violent eruption by maybe an employee of yours, they're going to want to make sure that they're safe going back there, and that is your responsibility. If you've taken any of my other trainings with sexual harassment, discrimination, you know that it's the employer's responsibility to make sure people interacting and engaging in your company are safe, right? So those type of people are no exception. Let's talk about the statistics, and man, are they scary. We unfortunately live in a violent society, and that violence finds its way to the workplace. 1/6 of violent crimes occur in the workplace. There are over 1.5 million incidents a year. Violence is the second leading cause of workplace deaths. 3 workers die each day, and guns are involved in 80% of those deaths. As many as 18,000 people are assaulted at work each week. And violence costs American industries millions in lost productivity, legal fees, and other related expenses every year. And again, as a reminder, certain jobs pose a higher risk. Those include employees handling cash, maybe working alone, working late hours, working in high crime areas. So as you're going through this training, I want you to think about what employees have to maybe worry about that or other situations, right? When I describe these other violent actions, what employees could encounter them, and then obviously thinking about training and communication on how to respond and how to prevent. Employee-related violence in the workplace is caused when someone reacts to a trigger in a violent manner. These triggers can be related to the workplace. For example, when a business struggles and needs to have a layoff, affected employees can react violently. Employees who are fired for disciplinary or other reasons can also become violent, either at the time of firing or later. Current employees who are warned about bad behavior may have a negative and violent reaction. And then employees who receive a less than satisfactory performance review, maybe someone who didn't get that raise or the promotion they were promised, right, or they expected, that could trigger a violent reaction from them. And then very commonly, conflicts among employees. Those can sometimes escalate into violent behavior. So making sure you understand and follow your organization's procedures for handling these incidents, such as conducting exit interviews, denying access to computer files, or escorting former employees off the premises. So as you look down the list, you also see some personal things, right? And again, as I mentioned, we are human. We come to work with baggage. We can't just stop it at the door and then put on our happy face and be an employee. Unfortunately, it affects our day-to-day. So these types of things, alcohol or drug abuse, emotional problems, financial difficulties, as we bring those into the workplace and we're under stress, anxiety, fear, frustration, those could cause an eruption or a trigger, and we can lash out at a coworker or a customer or anyone that we're working with. So it's important to understand those and then hopefully be proactive and try to get your employee to cope with them by utilizing some resources available. Violence can also come from customer interactions. So disgruntled or upset, angry customers. Again, talking about that high crime situation, or an employee working with cash, robberies, muggings, that type of thing. Those are also triggers. And then just unfortunately in this day and age have random acts of violence where somebody just comes in and for no reason, right, does something tragic and terrible. And so we have to be prepared for those and make sure that we're communicating how to respond and try to prevent those as much as possible. In this part of the session, we'll look at how to identify and respond to threats of workplace violence. In order to respond effectively to violent incidences, you must first be able to recognize the signs. So we have signs that potentially someone could be violent, and then we have the immediate threat. And again, I think these are all things that we're aware of and probably have noticed and seen, hopefully not too much. But when we have someone that's a potential for violence, the signs are someone who's threatening to get even, blaming others, being very defensive, someone who talks about violence or weapons frequently, and someone who holds grudges. Those type of people have the tendency to lash out, become violent, overreact, and maybe do something that could be a threat to someone else. Immediate threats obviously are a lot more in your face and more easier to address, and also easier to see, right? Those are threatening words or moves, someone who's raising their voice and begins yelling, and or using abusive language. So again, making sure your employees know how to spot these signs, and then more importantly, who to report them to and who to reach out to for support. When you notice signs of potential violence, take immediate steps to diffuse the situation. Here's what you want to do. You want to remain calm. You want to show respect. You want to continue to speak in a moderate tone of voice. And you want to focus on the problem by asking for details about the situation, going over possible solutions, right? You want to start talking them down. You want to listen, and you want to focus on getting them help and taking them away from their aggravation. And if you still feel the person may become violent, that's when you want to alert coworkers, right? Maybe you need some help, or someone needs to be escorted off property, or whatever, but letting others know that there could be some danger, and so preparing for that. And then where to go to report that incident. These are the things you want to do in the first response. What you don't want to do is argue, agitate, raise your voice, tell that person what they're doing is wrong, or they're wrong for being upset. And mimicking the angry person's behavior, this will only escalate the situation and make it worse. Your job is to, again, talk them down, calm them down, help them focus on the problem and away from the angry behavior. You and your employees need to know and regularly practice security measures. So each facility, vicinity, organization is going to be a little different, but these are some of the most common that you can utilize and incorporate into your organization. That way you can prevent and minimize violent tendencies from others outside. Make use of security cameras. So if there are cameras, if you have alarms, making sure you know how to access them, what the alarm sounds like. So if there is a danger, everyone knows when they hear this noise that means to leave the building, right? If there are doors that are locked, making sure they're locked, and or if they're coded entries, making sure you're not just giving out that password to just anybody. Making sure that you're locking that door. You're not making it keeping it open just because it's easier to not enter a code. Lighting is important. Outside your facility, if someone's working late nights, or maybe you're in an area that's not so good, where there's a little bit more higher crime or traffic, you want to make sure your employees are safe getting to their vehicles, right? And so if there is any lighting opportunities to brighten it up and make sure people are aware of their surroundings, that's something you definitely want to look into. And then with all of these, if the lighting's not working, the locks are broken, you want to make sure that there's a procedure for reporting these things that need to be fixed. You also can participate in any conflict resolution training. This is a great way to help your employees deal with agitated people. It'll help them understand how to effectively communicate, have a more productive conversation, and stick to an objective solution and not get emotional and take everything personal. And lastly, encourage employees that are feeling stressed to take advantage of counseling services offered by your organization. So we'll talk a little bit more about this in the last couple slides, that we have a partnership with an employee assistance program. And it's a great tool to help people be more proactive if they're going through something or they think they will, and or if they're experiencing stress, anxiety, anything, right? Maybe an aftermath of something that happened to them tragically. It's a great way for them to process the information and have someone support them. Some additional security procedures that you should be aware of, right? Again, depending on your organization, where you work, what your building has, but maybe there's a thing about strangers, right? So if there's a lobby or just transients hanging out, you want to encourage people to report that and make sure that you know who's in your building, right? Or hanging outside your building. So if there's visitors, making sure that they're escorted throughout the building and that they always have their identification badge on. And a couple things that you might not think about is just making sure you lock up your valuables. I think a lot of times we take it for granted that we're at work and we don't need to lock up our desk, right? And our purses, our wallets, our cell phones, things like that are in there, and we just maybe go and get lunch. And so again, a good reminder is making sure that you're locking up your valuables. And if there are missing items, if there's a break-in, you want to report those immediately so an investigation can take place. They can get to the root of the problem. And then lastly, a lot of companies have a danger signal, whether that's an alarm or some kind of password or code word or whatever, where that alerts everyone of immediate danger. So again, these are extra steps that you can take and should think about when you're going over training and maintaining that safe work environment. Working after hours places you and your employees at a heightened risk of violence. So again, thinking of things that you want to do to keep them safe. It's important for you and your employees to let people know that you'll be working outside your normal shift, right? Avoid being alone if you can, but in this day and age, a lot of people work really early, some people work really late, but again, letting your supervisor know and then avoiding it if you can, right? But if you do need to be in the building after hours, making sure that you stay near phones, you have your cell phone near, you lock your office door. If there's security, you let them know that you're there and you let them know when you're leaving. If you can walk out with someone else, do so. And then checking your car. And another thing I think we tend to forget is that we want to make sure that we're checking our car before we get in it and making sure no one's in the back seat waiting for us, right? And then encouraging those employees that take public transportation to sit near the driver. Statistics show that that is the safest place. Other things to think about is personal security. And as an organization, we want to encourage our employees, again, to take a second to think about when we're traveling, when we're doing business errands, whatever, even just in our own personal time, right? That some of these things we don't even think about, we just take for granted. Our personal space could be violated at any time, right? So a good reminder, especially if you have employees that are traveling a lot, especially by themselves at night in unfamiliar surroundings, is to go over this list with them, put it in your policy, or your training, I should say. So making sure that you encourage employees to keep their vehicle doors locked. They walk in busy, well-lit areas. And when they're walking purposefully. They're looking confident, like they know where they're going, what they're doing. Making eye contact with people if they can, right? And then checking surroundings. So if there is something they're unfamiliar with, an alley or a shortcut, but it's not well lit, making sure that they know that's probably not the best route to take. If they do feel like someone is following them, encouraging them to go into a store or some other business that's very populated, right? So they blend in and they're not by themselves. If they are carrying money and personal valuables with them, making sure they only carry what they need, not being flashy about it, and then dividing those valuables up. So maybe your credit card is in your purse, your money is in your pocket, that way if you do need to hand something over, you're only handing over maybe small bills that you have on person, right? If you are carrying items such as a laptop, a backpack, that you are keeping them close to your body and you've got a hand on them and it's not something that somebody can come and just rip off of you or unzip it and then grab your belongings. And then again, making sure you check your vehicle before entering. So just to reiterate, these are great training takeaways, reminders of people that are traveling, just day to day as well, walking to and from the building, as a reminder that, again, when they're on property, you want to keep them safe, or when they're working, doing work related activities, it's a good reminder to make sure they're practicing these habits frequently. There are several employer-generated actions that can be done to minimize violent eruptions. Background checks are one of them, and background checks are more important than ever in the effort to identify and prevent violent employees from entering the workplace. You don't have to do background checks for everyone, but the reasons for doing background checks or not doing them should be related to legitimate business interests. For example, if your company has 120 employees and 60 of them are employees that are repairmen and they enter customers' homes to conduct repairs, and then 60 of them are office workers, maybe doing call center or addressing issues, You may have a legitimate reason for conducting background checks for only the repair workers, right? Because they're in the home, it's a higher risk. But again, if you conduct a background check on one person, you need to make one repairman, you need to make sure you're doing it for all the repairmen, right? So hopefully everyone on the call realizes that you have to be consistent. And if one categorization of employees are being background checked, they all have to be background checked. Another way to figure out, the background of someone is using the job application. And if there's any unexplained gaps in an applicant's life or work history, they need to be discussed in an interview process. You need to ask them. It may not come up in a background check because of the lack of history and the data that someone won't be able to pull up where those people were living or what they were doing at that time. So making sure that you're asking that question and getting a good, secure answer and that you're feeling comfortable with it is also a good due diligence check to do beyond the background check. And then finally, employers that fail to investigate the background of an applicant who's hired for a risk-sensitive position may be liable for negligent hiring or retention if the employee is later involved in harmful misconduct or illegal activities. Punitive damages for those cases can run into millions of dollars. So when we're talking about keeping our employees safe and hiring good people in the workplace, it's not just the right thing to do, but obviously we have a responsibility, right? We could be hit with a negligent hiring claim if we fail to do so. In some instances, violent outbursts may be avoided by giving an employee proper notice of any performance or behavioral issue through progressive discipline. So it should not be a surprise to anyone when someone is terminated. They should understand what they've done, that this was coming, and they should have been counseled previously, right? So in that situation, definitely want to use progressive discipline to also reduce outbursts and frustration and violent tendencies. So the object of progressive discipline is to put the employee on notice that his or her behavior is not acceptable, make punishment fit the crime, and to get the employee to change the behavior. And so if the employee will not change his or her ways, the progression works up to dismissal. So as you see on the screen, those 4 steps, those are usually what's included in the progressive discipline, right? So you start with a conversation, it's informal, just, hey, what you're doing is inappropriate, you're violating this policy, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. If you do not, you will be written up next time, right? And so you move through those with a written notice, a suspension if necessary, and or a termination. So again, by doing so, by communicating with the employee, not only is it the right thing to do, and you usually get better behavior, but it also can help escalate or help de-escalate any violent actions and triggers in the future if and when you do have to discipline and or terminate. Union workplaces have established procedures for addressing employee grievances, and they do it really well. I tend to find that non-unionized organizations don't really have either really good procedures or they don't follow them. So when we talk about employee grievances, we talk about employee issues, right? And our goal here to maintain a safe working environment that everyone's happy is to address issues before they become problems, right? So let's talk about what that would look like. So usually an employee comes to a supervisor and has a verbal discussion that something is not working. There's an issue, it needs to be addressed, you kind of work it through, you do what you need to do, and then you try to get back and say, here's what we've decided, right? Now, if that's not a good enough answer, or if it continues to happen, that's when the employee may actually want to write it down, right? And give that explanation. And the supervisor gives the explanation to the employee of what we're going to do about it, right? And usually when you get to the written process, there's usually a timeline involved. It will take me 2 or 3 days to do this. I will get back to you with the decision, and then we'll talk more about what the outcome will be, right? At that point, we may need to also get HR involved or someone who wears an HR hat, and that way they can see, 1, is this compliant? 2, is it being consistently practiced throughout the organization? And is this going to be a trigger, or is there any other risks that I need to think about? And as a reminder, that's when you really want to utilize your HR account manager. We have exposure to a lot of different companies, different personalities, best practices. years of experience, right? And so we can really guide and help you through those situations, big or small, and make sure that you're on the right track, that you're eliminating your exposure. And if there is any exposure, here's what it's going to look like, right? So we can walk you through that. So I highly encourage, a good takeaway here is to come up with, if there are issues in the workplace, how do the employees communicate it to us, and how do we address them, right? And then of course working with us to help implement or make changes once those issues are brought to your attention. Termination meetings. We've got a couple of terminations, different types of termination meetings. We have a termination that you are terminating someone who is violent, right? And so we definitely want to act a little bit more differently, more cautious. But we have a termination that maybe it's a regular termination. Someone's been performing badly, they're not meeting expectations and guidelines. So we want to treat them the same and be aware that there is potential for maybe some outbursts or violent tendencies, yet we also want to prepare and be more aware if there's more cautionary objectives that need to be met, right? So for example, for everyone, we want to make sure that we're terminating with respect. You know, when you walk into a termination meeting, it's still a human being, they're losing their job. It's humiliating, it's scary, right? So the more you can be genuine and empathetic, the better. That will hopefully eliminate any hostility, humiliation, and de-escalate any violent tendencies, right? You want to be as direct and concise as possible. Tell them why they're fired so they don't assume anything, and then be clear, right to the point, and get them out of there as quickly as you can. Now, if it's someone who had a violent tendency, or you think they're going to, you definitely want to act a little differently, right? And that's what the last 4 are. You might want to choose an office near an exit. That way they can get out really quickly, or you can. Some of my clients have even done termination meetings offsite because it reduces that visibility to all the other employees, the humiliation, them having to go back to their desk, that type of thing. You want to minimize furniture and other objects in the room, so that way there's nothing they can do to throw or hurt themselves or you. Request security personnel. It's always good to have someone else in the room, but if there's a security person, or if you want to hire a security to kind of watch out and maintain the building for a couple of days, that's definitely something that is a good precautionary step to take. And then last but not least, definitely a major one that most people hopefully do not need to do, but if necessary, make sure you obtain a restraining order. So again, I think you'll know best if you do need to get a security or a restraining order, right? But I want to emphasize, don't take it lightly, because you know, we think we know how people are going to respond, but things can go south in a termination meeting. And it's always better to err on the side of caution. And if you need to have security there for the next couple days to make sure that person doesn't come back and be rude or violent or just disruptive, right? Because you also need to protect your other employees, do so. It's money well spent, okay? You also need to be able to protect yourself if you are confronted by a violent person. So in the case of a mugging or a theft where personal property is at stake and the assailant does not intend to do physical harm, don't resist. Give over your valuables and let the person go. So a good reminder, if you have employees working with money or around expensive company property, educating them and training them that their first response should be give them whatever the robber wants and try to get out of their way, right? Your personal well-being is more important than my $10,000 or my computer equipment, right? So you want to educate them and make sure the employee knows that they're not going to be disciplined if they don't secure company property. You also want to educate them not to get physical, but yet if they need to protect themselves, make sure they know they can do so by screaming, kicking, you know, doing whatever they need to do to fight someone off. Letting them know to report it immediately, reminding them not to clean up. So if there could be fingerprints, if there's a break-in, things were damaged, definitely don't want to disrupt the crime scene, right? Because they need to, the authorities will need to go in and examine and get clues from that. And then the last one is dealing with the emotional as well as the physical well-being, right? So making sure you're not ignoring stressful or fearful feelings associated with the event, and making yourself available for assistance, and then also providing that professional assistance if needed. Let's talk about responding to threats. No one really wants to talk about this or think it will happen where they work, but if we're discussing workplace violence, I really felt that I had to talk about an active shooter. Businesses are still the #1 risk for being the site of where an active shooting is taking place, and sadly, schools are second. These tips I got from the US Department of Homeland Security, and this is just a quick overview of how to respond when an active shooter is present and in your vicinity. So I want to stress that if you feel you're more at high risk, or if this is something you're just passionate about and want to educate employees about, definitely take the time to get an expert, go into more detail, practice, get a plan in place, and then make sure you roll it out the correct way, right? So for this training, I just wanted to do a high level, and we're going to talk about coping during a situation. So making sure that you're aware of your environment and any possible dangers. Take note of the 2 nearest exits in any facility that you are visiting. If you're in an office, stay there and secure the door. And as a last resort, only should you attempt to take down the active shooter. Again, your safety is the #1 thing, but if you really do have to approach or engage in the active shooter due to your safety, you definitely want to do so. And then, of course, once you're safe to do it, call 911 so you can get help and authorities out on property. Now, if there's an active shooter in your vicinity, 3 things you want to think about. You want to first try to evacuate. The second one, if you can't, is hide out. And then the third is take action. So with an evacuation, making sure you have an escape route and plan in mind. And this is where that is emergency evacuation plan and emergency plan. You know, where are your employees going to go? What should they do, right? And so making sure they know where to go, how to get there, making sure they know to leave valuables behind, and then keeping hands visible. So as you're leaving the facility, if there are authorities out there or anybody else, making sure that your hands are visible. So if something is in your hands, or if your hands are in your pocket or your jacket, that it's not construed that you're trying to hide a weapon or something like that. The second one is hide out. So if you cannot escape immediately, you want to hide in any area out of the shooter's view. You want to block that entry to your hiding place and lock the door. And you want to silence your cell phone. That way, if it does, obviously you get a call right there and then, the shooter doesn't know where you're at. The shooter will think it's just an empty room, right? And then last but not least, take action. Again, this is only as a last resort. If you feel your life is in imminent danger, you should try to get out of there, do whatever you can, to get the active shooter out of your path. But again, I want to stress that's only as a last resort. Cyberterrorism is one possible means of a terrorist attack. Why? Because computer networks are extremely useful in business, which make them extremely effective targets for hackers, terrorists, whoever who want to disrupt the economy or maybe get our private data, right? Think Facebook, and sell it, use it for other means. So for this reason, the company should take certain measures, right, to protect that data. Companies need to install firewalls that guard against unwanted activity inside the network. They also should employ virus protection systems and keep the systems up to date to guard against hackers. You and your employees can keep the network safe by encouraging them to never install unlicensed or pirated software, teaching them to delete suspicious emails, especially those with attachments. Don't even open them, right? That's a good practice. Never revealing computer passwords and changing them frequently, and avoiding improper or illegal websites and downloads. So most companies have policies on using company software, equipment, computers, protecting data. If you don't, highly encourage you to get one. Reach out to your HRIM, to me, and we can help you draft that policy. We've got many examples that we can help you build that and educate your employees on what to do and what not to do. Fast, effective response to a terrorist attack can save lives and property. Here's what you want to do. So the most basic safety step for responding to a terrorist threat is to turn off local fans or ventilation units. I don't know if everyone has access to those, right? So if you do, that's what you want to do, is get to them quickly and turn them off, or alert someone to do so. Obviously, try to leave the threatened area immediately. Close off the threatened area to keep others out of danger. Call 911 to report the threat, and notify your boss and security. You also want to make a list of all the affected people or whoever were in the building. That way you can give that list to law enforcement officers and maybe public health authorities. And that way, one, you know who's accounted for, who needs to be supported or rescued. But knowing who is there and who's not will be very helpful in the next stages of your response. If full evacuation of the building becomes necessary, you want to follow your company procedures, right? So here are some basics that most people have in their evacuation plan. They know what the evacuation signal sounds like, what it looks like, what it sounds like. They know to listen and to follow any instructions that are given, whether it's over a public address system or in person. That includes which section of the building may be unsafe to exit through and where the designated meeting area is. You want to make sure you shut down any equipment, close doors and windows if you can, follow the quickest exit route, and go immediately to the designated meeting area. So I can't stress enough that most companies do not have an evacuation plan, right? Or if something were to happen, an emergency or a natural disaster, what do we do? And this had me thinking about the Southwest tragedy that happened, where unfortunately a woman lost her life. And many, if you saw the video, many of the passengers didn't know how to wear the oxygen masks correctly. And the big gripe was people do not listen to the safety precautions that those list of things to do and don't do if there is a emergency evacuation or if something were to happen, right? And I know I'm guilty of it. And I think we just all have to remember to take the time, it could happen. We need to familiarize ourselves with the buildings we work in, if we're on a flight, what we do, right? And where our exits are, and that way we're a little bit more prepared. And I hate thinking we have to live in society like that, but unfortunately that's kind of where we're at. So that's just a really good reminder that not only should you have a plan in place, but definitely want to practice it as well, because there's nothing worse that when something does happen, people don't know what to do because they haven't practiced it or they forgot about it. And what you really want people to do in that situation is remain calm, right? The more you practice and talk about it, the more calm they will be. So keep those thoughts in your mind as you're finishing up this webinar and thinking about what action items you may have after it. So the aftermath. So once the workplace violence is over, you'll need to deal with the aftermath. And first we want to look for signs of distress among employees. Are they withdrawing from work activity or peers? Do they appear numb or motionless? Are they frequently calling in sick? Are they overworking or working slowly? Are they having difficulty concentrating, making decisions, dealing with change? These are all signs that something could be happening and you need to have a conversation and see what's going on. So if you see these signs, use one or more of the following methods to help yourself and your employees cope. Encourage them to talk about it with employees and colleagues. Encourage them to spend extra time with loved ones or people that are supportive and really can give them that encouragement they need. Remind them, turn off the television, right? Don't read the news. We are constantly inundated with negative feedback and things that happen in our society, right? And it's so easy to get wrapped up and start getting anxious and nervous, and those just perpetuate fears and anxiety. So really taking that step can probably really help someone going through the aftermath of a violent situation. And then lastly, encouraging them to seek professional counseling. Making sure you know what resources are available to you in your company or in the community, but really encouraging them and then getting them the support they need. Which leads me to my next slide, the Employee Assistance Program. So if you didn't know, your partnership with AlphaStaff offers you this free service. We utilize the Health Advocate. It's a professional counseling assistance program. They offer all of the employees and their dependents 3 free phone calls a year. And it is confidential. That's key, right? We want to make sure our employees know that this is available to them at no cost. And in addition, no one's going to know about it, okay? So as we talked a little bit more about these violent acts and, terrorism, cyber terrorism, active shooters, a good reminder with this health advocate is that a lot of these problems may stem from the 5 things listed below. Personal things that we're going through, things that we deal with every day that we bring to the workplace. So as a reminder, the health advocate supplies licensed experts that can walk people through stress or anxiety, drug or alcohol abuse, marital relationships, right? So if someone's having a problem here, let's fight it. Let's get them the support they need before things get ugly and escalate to a violent manner. That's the goal of the Employee Assistance Program. So as a manager, it's really important that you develop those relationships with your employees, that you feel comfortable to engage or ask questions. And if you see any of these signs that we talked about, then you definitely want to reach out and say, hey, did you know that this is a benefit for you? And I really encourage you to utilize it. What else can AlphaStaff do? Besides the Employee Assistance Program, we also can provide examples of emergency action plans and evacuation procedures. We can also assist with employee issues. So I think that's probably our #1 request, right? Or what we get called about the most is, hey, I've got an employee, he's not performing, or he's behaving in this way and it's offending someone. What do I do, right? And so by being proactive and addressing that before it gets to all the things we talked about prior is really important, and making sure to reach out to us because we are the experts. We can offer a objective opinion. We can offer guidance, talking points, and best practices, and obviously show you and talk you through risks that could happen if you don't respond or take action, right? So that's a really important step and a benefit that you should take advantage of with us. We also have conflict resolution training. As I mentioned earlier, this is a great training to educate employees on how to effectively communicate when there's issues, how to productively resolve them, how to come to making a decision and work together as a collaborative team to voice concerns and opinions and try to get everyone on the same page, right? And lastly, background checks. So we do partner with several vendors that offer background screenings. And as we talked about, that's definitely a very important step in the pre-employment that can negate any kind of employees high risk coming into your workplace. Keys to remember, workplace violence can take many forms and has numerous actions. Keep alert to signs of potential violence and take immediate action when you recognize them, and make sure to follow your security procedures and encourage employees to do likewise. Any questions? So you have my information, you have obviously your HRIMs. If any questions come up afterwards, please feel free to reach out to any of us and we'll definitely support you, answer them as quickly as we can. Last minute housekeeping, if you do need copies of this presentation and or you would like to get that certification information for SHRM and HRCI, please contact us at hrsc@alphastaff.com, or you can pick up the phone the old school way and give us a call and we'll get that information to you right away. And I want to do a little plug for our next training. That's May 5th, hosted by Cindy Williams, one of our HRIMs in the East Coast. It's going to be a great one, Train the Trainer, how to have a harassment and discrimination-free workplace. So if this is something that you've been struggling with, obviously with all the news in the media, this is a great topic and probably a very timely topic, right? That you want to protect yourself, educate your employees, and you maybe want one person to own the process a little bit and do that training. This is a perfect webinar for you, so we hope you can join. If not, as always, we always record them and they'll be available on demand when you need it. I hope you have a great day. Thank you again for joining. Thank you for your business and take care, and hopefully we can talk to you soon. Bye-bye.